Let me be very clear about what the FBI director told the Senate Intelligence Committee in closed session 3 days ago, portions of which have now been confirmed through multiple intelligence community sources. Because this is not about terrorism in the conventional sense that Americans have been conditioned to understand since September 11th. This is not about suicide bombers or mass casualty attacks designed to generate fear through spectacular violence. What it is the activation of a strategic capability that Iranian intelligence services have been positioning for more than 15 years while American counterintelligence was focused on Sunni extremism, while resources were poured into countering al-Qaeda and Islamic State networks. And while the threat from Iranian-directed networks was systematically downplayed because acknowledging it would complicate nuclear negotiations and regional diplomacy. Having been inside the national security apparatus, having sat in threat assessment briefings where priorities get established and where uncomfortable intelligence gets quietly managed around because it conflicts with policy preferences, I can tell you with complete certainty that what we are seeing is not a sudden development. It is the culmination of a patient, methodical intelligence operation that was designed to remain dormant until strategic circumstances made activation worth the revelation of capability. Stay with me, because by the end of this analysis, you will understand something that is not being publicly discussed by government officials. You will understand why this situation represents a fundamental intelligence failure and why the implications extend far beyond immediate security concerns. 53 cities. That is the number of urban centers where FBI field offices have identified credible indicators of coordinated Iranian intelligence activity over the past 72 hours. This is not 53 separate groups operating independently. This is evidence of a networked capability that received activation instructions and began executing pre-planned operations within a compressed time frame. The operations thus far have not involved kinetic attacks. They have involved surveillance of critical infrastructure, probing of security responses, positioning of assets near sensitive facilities, and most concerning, demonstration of capability through coordinated actions that serve no tactical purpose except to signal that the network exists and can be activated at will. That last point is critical. Iran is not striking. Iran is demonstrating that it can strike whenever strategic calculation makes that choice advantageous. Let me walk you through what we know about how this network was constructed, because understanding the methodology explains why American counterintelligence failed to detect and neutralize it. Iranian intelligence, primarily through the Quds Force External Operations Directorate, has been running a long-term human intelligence operation inside the United States since at least 2008. The operation has relied primarily on three recruitment categories. First, Iranian Americans with family remaining in Iran who can be pressured through threats against relatives. Second, ideological recruits from communities opposed to American foreign policy in the Middle East, including elements of anti-war movements, some academic circles, and diaspora populations from countries that have adversarial relationships with American regional policy. Third, criminal networks willing to provide services for compensation without ideological motivation. The network architecture was designed specifically to avoid detection through traditional counterintelligence methods. Operatives received instructions through encrypted communications that appeared as routine commercial or personal traffic. Dead drops were employed using commercial shipping infrastructure where packages could be moved through legitimate supply chains. Financial support was laundered through business transactions involving front companies companies in third countries, making fund flow analysis difficult. Most critically, the network maintained complete operational dormancy for years at a time. No operations, no communications, no activity that would trigger surveillance or investigation. Just positioning, preparation, and waiting for activation orders that might never come. American counterintelligence was not blind to Iranian intelligence operations. FBI Counterintelligence Division has been tracking Iranian networks since the 1979 hostage crisis. What failed was the assessment of scale, sophistication, and strategic patience. The working assumption among American intelligence agencies was that Iranian networks in the United States were focused on technology acquisition, sanctions evasion, and monitoring of Iranian dissident groups. Those operations have been detected and disrupted regularly. What was missed was the parallel construction of a strategic capability designed to remain undetected until needed, a capability that was compartmentalized from other Iranian intelligence operations precisely to avoid compromise through traditional counterintelligence methods. Most people stop here and focus on the immediate security response. They miss what I am about to explain next, which is the strategic purpose this capability serves for Iranian deterrence and escalation management. Iran faces a fundamental security dilemma. It cannot match American conventional military power. It cannot prevent American air operations against Iranian territory if the United States decides to conduct them. It cannot protect critical infrastructure from American strikes. What it can do is create costs that American policymakers must account for when considering military action. The activation of sleeper cell capability inside the United States is a demonstration that any escalation against Iran will have consequences not just in the Middle East, but inside the American homeland. That demonstration fundamentally alters the escalation calculus that American presidents face when considering military options. The implications of this situation extend far beyond immediate security concerns about potential attacks. Let me explain the three strategic dimensions that matter most. First, the deterrence implication. Iran has now demonstrated a capability that American intelligence assessed existed but could not locate or neutralize. That demonstration signals to American policymakers that military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities or IRGC command infrastructure will trigger domestic consequences that cannot be fully prevented through security measures. The uncertainty about what those consequences might entail, which targets might be struck, and how severe the damage might be, creates psychological pressure against military options, even if the actual capability is more limited than the demonstration suggests. Second, the intelligence failure implication. The fact that a foreign intelligence service successfully positioned a networked capability inside the United States without detection represents a systemic counterintelligence failure of extraordinary magnitude. This is not about missing a specific plot or failing to prevent a particular attack. This is about a strategic intelligence operation running for 15 years inside the United States homeland while resources were allocated elsewhere. That failure raises uncomfortable questions about what other capabilities might exist undetected, what other adversaries might have replicated Iranian methodology, and whether American counterintelligence is optimized for threats that no longer represent the primary danger. Third, the escalation management implication. Iran now has an activated capability that it can choose to employ or choose to restrain, creating both threat and opportunity for diplomatic leverage. If tensions escalate further, Iran can conduct limited attacks demonstrating capability while offering to deactivate networks in exchange for American restraint. If diplomatic opportunities emerge, Iran can offer network dismantlement as a bargaining chip in negotiations. The existence of the capability, now confirmed, gives Iran options across the escalation spectrum that it did not have before activation. That fundamentally changes the dynamics of any negotiation about nuclear programs, regional behavior, or sanctions relief. What comes next is where things take a serious turn because the FBI response to this situation tells you everything about how difficult the counterintelligence challenge actually is. The Bureau has initiated investigations in all 53 cities where activity was detected. Those investigations involve thousands of agents, surveillance teams, intelligence analysts, and support personnel. They require coordination with local law enforcement, Department of Homeland Security components, and intelligence community partners. They consume resources that were allocated to other priorities, including domestic terrorism, cybercrime, and counterintelligence operations against other foreign actors. And despite all of that resource commitment, the likelihood of successfully identifying and neutralizing the entire network is extremely low. The network was designed with compartmentation that limits what any individual operative knows about overall structure. Most participants likely do not know they are part of an Iranian intelligence operation. They believe they are engaged in activism, criminal enterprise, or commercial activity. The operational security employed means that electronic surveillance will catch only fragments of communication. The use of dead drops and commercial infrastructure means that physical surveillance will observe legitimate activity that happens to serve intelligence purposes without being obviously criminal. The time delay between activation and operational employment means that suspects can be monitored without clear evidence of intent to conduct attacks. American legal standards require evidence of conspiracy to commit specific crimes before arrests can be made, and that evidence is exactly what compartmented networks are designed to avoid generating until the moment of actual operational execution. Let me pause and address what the political response to this situation is likely to be, because understanding the political dynamics explains why solutions will be difficult. There will be calls for mass arrests of individuals with Iranian connections. There will be demands for expanded surveillance authorities. There will be proposals for restrictions on Iranian American communities. All of these responses will be counterproductive. Mass arrests without evidence create constitutional crises and civil liberties violations that undermine domestic security rather than enhancing it. Expanded surveillance without targeting guidance simply generates more data that cannot be effectively analyzed. Restrictions on ethnic communities create grievances that Iranian intelligence can exploit for future recruitment, while alienating the very communities whose cooperation is essential for counterintelligence success. The effective counterintelligence response requires patient, methodical investigation, building cases that meet legal standards while attempting to map network structures through analysis of patterns rather than electronic intercepts. That takes years, not weeks. It requires resources sustained over election cycles and shifting political priorities. It demands patience from political leaders and public acceptance that perfect security is impossible. None of those conditions are likely to be met in the current American political environment, which means the counterintelligence response will likely be some combination of insufficient and excessive, catching low-level participants while missing operational leadership, violating civil liberties while failing to dismantle networks. Now, let me explain why this situation carries broader implications for American security architecture and international positioning. Because what Iran has demonstrated is that patient adversaries with sophisticated intelligence services can position capabilities inside the United States despite massive counterintelligence resources and advanced surveillance technology. That demonstration will encourage other adversaries to attempt similar operations. China already operates extensive intelligence networks inside the United States focused on technology acquisition and political influence. Russia maintains networks focused on intelligence collection and influence operations. North Korea has demonstrated capability to conduct cyber operations and has attempted physical operations through third parties. Every one of these actors now has a proven template for how to position strategic capabilities that can remain dormant until needed. The broader implication is that the United States homeland can no longer be considered a sanctuary from adversary action in the way that it was throughout the Cold War. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union maintained intelligence networks inside the United States, but those networks were focused on espionage, not operational capability. The threshold for conducting operations inside the American homeland was extremely high because the risks of escalation were unacceptable. What has changed is that regional powers facing potential American military action have concluded that creating homeland costs is necessary for deterrence, and that the escalation risks are manageable if operations are carefully calibrated. That shift fundamentally alters American freedom of action in regional conflicts. For 70 years, American military planners could design operations assuming that the American homeland would not be directly affected by combat operations overseas. That assumption enabled aggressive military postures and willingness to employ force because the costs were externalized to forward deployed forces and allies. If adversaries can credibly threaten to impose costs inside the United States, the political calculus surrounding military action changes. Presidents must weigh not just military effectiveness and international consequences, but domestic political exposure to attacks that could have been avoided through diplomatic alternatives. China is observing this dynamic with particular interest. Chinese strategic planning for Taiwan contingencies has always faced the challenge that American military intervention could prevent successful unification. Chinese strategists have studied how to impose costs that would deter American intervention, including economic coercion, cyber attacks, and space-based capabilities targeting American military networks. What Iran has now demonstrated is that patient positioning of capabilities inside the American homeland creates additional deterrent effect without requiring advanced technology or massive resource commitment. That lesson will be incorporated into Chinese strategic planning and will manifest in intelligence operations that may not be detected for another decade. Russia faces similar strategic calculations regarding NATO expansion and regional conflicts. Russian intelligence has been rebuilding networks inside Europe and the United States after post-Cold War degradation. The Iranian template provides methodology that Russian intelligence services, which have far more experience and sophistication than Iranian counterparts, can adapt to their specific requirements. Russian networks might focus on infrastructure disruption, political influence, or information operations, but the core concept of dormant capabilities awaiting activation under strategic circumstances applies equally. Every regional power facing potential American military pressure is now recalculating what capabilities are necessary for deterrence and what operations are feasible for intelligence services willing to accept long-term investment without guaranteed return. That recalculation will manifest over the next decade in intelligence operations that current counterintelligence resources cannot adequately address because the scale of the threat exceeds available capacity. Stay with me for this final section because I want to be very clear about what this situation means for policy choices ahead. The activation of Iranian sleeper cell networks demonstrates that deterrence in the 21st century operates differently than Cold War models. Regional powers cannot match American conventional military capability, but they can create costs that influence American decision-making. Those costs include not just military casualties and financial expense, but domestic security exposure that previous generations did not face. American policymakers need to incorporate that reality into strategic planning rather than assuming that sufficient military power automatically translates to freedom of action. The counterintelligence challenge is structural, not tactical. No amount of increased surveillance or expanded legal authorities will eliminate the possibility of patient adversaries positioning capabilities inside the United States. What is required is a fundamental rethinking of how counterintelligence is organized, what partnerships are necessary with communities that have connections to countries of concern, and what legal frameworks enable effective investigation while protecting civil liberties. That rethinking is politically difficult and will not happen without sustained leadership commitment. The diplomatic implication is that negotiations with adversaries must account for capabilities that exist whether acknowledged or not. Iranian sleeper cell networks will be part of any negotiation about nuclear programs, regional behavior, or sanctions relief, whether explicitly discussed or implicitly understood. American negotiators who pretend those networks do not exist or can be eliminated through counterintelligence action are negotiating from false premises. Effective diplomacy requires acknowledging realities that are uncomfortable and incorporating them into negotiating positions. If this analysis has helped you understand why the Iranian sleeper cell activation represents not just a security incident but a fundamental shift in deterrence dynamics, then share this video. Share it with anyone who believes that American homeland security is simply a matter of sufficient resources and expanded authorities, with anyone advocating for military action against Iran without accounting for domestic consequences, with anyone who assumes that intelligence failures are always preventable through better management. Subscribe because the people who will understand what comes next are those who recognize that comfortable assumptions about American security are being systematically challenged by adversaries who have studied our vulnerabilities and found operational methods we were not prepared to counter. Leave your thoughts below. What do you believe is the most important implication of Iranian sleeper cell activation? Is it the deterrence effect on American military options, the counterintelligence failure that allowed network construction, the demonstration effect encouraging other adversaries, or the long-term restructuring of how homeland security must be approached? I read everything you write because understanding these strategic shifts requires collective analysis. Stay informed, stay clear-eyed, because what we are witnessing is not a temporary crisis, but a permanent change in the security environment that Americans must navigate, and understanding that change is essential for anyone who takes national security seriously.